Welcome to Live at the Library, What's Going On. This year we're celebrating 40 years of the Music Library in Cork, and we have a series of interviews with contemporary Cork musicians from all genres.
Why don't you all fade away? Don't try and do what we all say. Trying to cause a big sensation. Talking about my generation. This is my generation. My generation.
Last week there was a huge treat for rock fans of all ages as The Who made a triumphant return to the stage of the Guildhall. They picked the Portsmouth concerts as a warm-up for a series of charity shows at the Royal Albert Hall. The concerts, not surprisingly, attracted people from far and wide, including a man called Irish Jack, a longtime friend of Pete Townshend and believed to be the inspiration for the film Quadrophenia.
The nickname came from the original manager of The Who was Kit Lambert. And
Yes.
I got tagged with that name during what can best be described as a night of madness in 1964. And I'm stuck with it since, that I'm never going to shake it off.
That's mad. Now, you're one of the original fans of The Who, weren't you?
Yes, but I wouldn't exactly describe myself as a fan of The Who, because I regard fans of The Who as people who queue up for tickets and buy CDs and, you know, queue at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning for a Who ticket. And I've never had it to do anything like that. So I'm not strictly a fan of The Who. I'm part of what you might describe as the Who family. Part of the Who family.
Tell us about when you first saw The Who, or saw them in action, or met, because you know you're a buddy of Pete Townshend.
Yes.
Tell us about that time.
Well, I first met them when I was 19, and the band was 17, and that was in 1962 in Shepherd's Bush. I went along to a dance, and they were playing. There was 32 people at the dance, 37 if you counted the band, and they were called the Detours, and they did everything by the Shadows. Roger Daltrey played lead guitar and trombone. John Entwistle played bass guitar and trumpet. Pete Townshend was, well, he learning guitar, but becoming quite adept at it. And we had a singer called Colin Dawson, who styled himself on Cliff Richards. And our original drummer was a fella called Dougie Sandham. And they were all working, all except Pete Townshend, who just started at Ealing Art College. This was Drummy's shoe shop, and to all you people out there who's ever heard of The Who, who's ever heard of Quadrophenia, this is where it started, with a pair of Dr. Martin boots, size 7 Dr. Martens. I had become the first busman in Cork to wear Dr. Martin boots. If I hadn't bought the size 7 Dr. Martens, Pete might never have written Quadrophenia. He was elated in the knowledge that one of his oldest friends had embraced 70s youth culture, even if I was 28 at the time. The next letter from Pete Townshend was to tell me that he was writing another rock opera. He was writing a rock opera, but this was going to be called Quadrophenia, and it was about me. And I don't think I even finished my dinner, I got so excited.
Cork Moments. Jack Lyons, longtime friend and fan of The Who.
I wanted to go to a dance where there was a band. I'd been to a few hops up in Father O'Leary Hall, you know, in the late 50s when I was about, say, 15. I'd never actually seen a band on stage, apart from seeing my father perform as a child, you know, in Kilcully, playing violin and saxophone and stuff like that. But it was in Shepherd's Bush, this place called Bosley's, and I went there, and I don't know who looked more dreadful, me or the band, and, you know, 30 people, playing to 30 people, a big dance hall, you know. They weren't the Who then at all, of course, they were the Detours. So I just went over and at the end of the evening, and I zeroed in on this guy, 6 foot tall, long nose, straight hair. I never had straight hair, always curly hair. He had everything I want, and what was a bonus was the guitar round the shoulders, you know. I said, hello, I said, I'm Jack from Shepherd's Bush. And of course, in that sort of Cockney way that they addressed me, he says, hello, Jack from Shepherd's Bush, I'm Pete from Ealing. And that was it. He was Pete Townshend from Ealing Common. And within a month then I was calling out to his house, annoying him with guitar strings, which were always the wrong kind, you know. Then the Who christened me Irish Jack. And it's almost like schizophrenia, because here in Cork, people... they say, he's not Irish Jack, he's Jackie the Bell. It's awful. I've been Jackie the Bell since I started on the buses here in Cork in CIE. So, I don't know who I am.
Have Irish connections, Pete Townshend, do you know?
Yeah, I have. Well, one real one is called Irish Jack, who's an old friend of mine who was a mod around in the Shepherd's Bush days when the Who used to play in that area. The boy that came over to work over here.
Apparently Irish Jack Lyons, said on one occasion, I believed in them, talking about the early Who. I was willing to ditch Roman Catholicism for a greater religion called the Who.
Well, that's rather tragic, because I think he actually did it. And I don't know, I think, you know, that what's, I suppose, quite nice looking back on the Who's whole career is that I thank God that there's some God in there. You know, that I've always believed in God, and so anybody that has done what Jack did and was to have taken, you know, a rock band as an alternative for religion, at least wasn't dealing with a completely empty vessel. I get very angry when I hear the fundamentalist Americans talking about my work as being satanic or diabolical or devilish in any way, because I've always had the highest motives. And the interesting thing about Jack was that I think when he finally came back to Ireland and settled back into the normal rhythm, leads a very modest life. He took the triumph, if you like, the celebration, the glory of his adolescence, and he's managed to sort of internalise it, you know. But it's good because it's contained in a piece of history. With me, I've had to drag it along with me. Well,
I'm glad to know a Cork man has had such an influence on your career, Pete, indeed.
And he discovered that my granddad was born in Cork too, which is something that my grandfather had never told my mother. I mean, I've got tremendous affection for Ireland. I mean, half my family are, they're not Irish, but they've got Irish grandparents. I've got Irish grandparents on both sides, actually.
From where? You mentioned Cork earlier.
Well, the other one was a gypsy, Tinker, and was basically just on the road with a donkey, as far as the story goes. I don't know, my grandmother's grandmother, my mother's grandmother, yeah. And one person in particular always brings Cork in particular back to my consciousness all the time, which is the famous Irish Jack. He's the man that was the little mod from Goldhawk Road who'd left Ireland and come over and was a mod over here, and I based Quadrophenia on his life. He was the failed mod. The reason he failed is he couldn't afford to buy all the clothes and the scooters, because he was spending all his money on digs, because he wasn't living with his mum and dad, you see. And because he'd actually elected to come over here all on his own. He was only 16. He's back in Cork now. He's a bus conductor, I think, or a postman. He was a bus conductor for a bit. Now he's a postman. Got 3 little kids. Well, and he writes to me at great length regularly. He's an incredibly talented writer. So I often think about it. I don't know. I know Mick Jagger mentioned.
In the spotlight tonight is Chris Atkins from Solihull, an IT consultant, and his subject is the spy Noor Inayat Khan. Paul Sinha from London, a GP and stand-up comedian, and his subject, the explorer Ferdinand Magellan. Christine Adam from Glasgow, a solicitor, her subject Edith Wharton, and James Corcoran from Didcot, a mortgage consultant, his subject, the mod movement in Britain. And our final contender, please. And your name?
James Corcoran.
Your occupation?
Mortgage consultant.
And your chosen subject?
The mod movement in Britain.
The mods in 2 minutes, starting now. Which of the two makes of motor scooter favoured by the mods has a name meaning wasp in Italian?
Vespa.
Correct. Which Friday night television pop music show whose slogan was "The Weekend Starts Here" was a showcase for the latest music and fashion?
Ready, steady, go.
Yes, at Easter 1964, which East Coast resort became the scene of the first confrontation between the police and mods and rockers,
Clacton.
when 97 arrests were made?
Clacton.
Yes, I'm the Face was on the A side of the only single released by The Who in their incarnation as the High Numbers. What was on the B side?
Zoot Suit.
Yes, in March 64, which celebrated mod band played on the last night of the Marquee Club's old Oxford Street premises and the opening night of its new Wardour Street premises?
The Who.
The Yardbirds. Which character in Quadrophenia is said to have been based on Irish Jack, a mod and friend of Pete Townshend?
Jimmy.
Thanks for coming in, Jack.
Thank you, Sheena.
I know you as Jack Lyons, but you're also known as Jackie LaBelle, Irish Jack, and the 5th unofficial member of The Who. Maybe you could tell me how you came to meet them, the band, that super band, The Who.
Well, before I say any of that, I'd just like to say at the outset that I'd like to thank you for agreeing to do this, asking me to do it, and I'd also like to thank the library staff who have been absolutely fantastic, and especially Liam Ronan. And thing is about here, I'm privileged to be talking to you about what is my life, which is the band. I'm 74. I've only not known the band for 19 of those years. And what is lovely about being in here with all these people that I've invited along, friends of mine, all of them, is that my mother was a member of this library when she was 9. And before she died, one of her proudest moments was to come into lending and see a book on the shelf with my name on it. And it's just a lovely thing. So this is my second love, this Cork City Library. So,
and is that book you're referring to there, is that a renewed interest in reading the Frank and
well,
Walters
yes, that's
book?
one, and
Yeah.
the other one, the Frank and Walters, a renewed interest in reading, and the other book then is the Who Concert File.
Yeah. Very good. So will you tell me about your days in London when you did meet them?
When I met the band?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what was a sort of a lead up to that is that it all started for me on the 7th of November 1943 at 60 Gillabbey Street when I was born in the front room. And I was born within the shadow of the bells ringing on a Sunday night at 7 o'clock. And my dad was a classical violinist, Jack Lyons. He studied under Alois Fleischmann Senior. And I grew up listening to stuff like Albert Cotelby's In the Monastery Garden and Jules Massini's Meditation, and also listening to my dad playing saxophone. And my dad tried to teach me both instruments, and he started off with the violin, and when my fingers began to cut, I ran to Mammy for a hug, and my dad just gave up on me. And then he tried to teach me the saxophone. Thing is about my father was that he was very fond of alcohol, as most musicians are. And when he would pass the saxophone to me, there would be a smell of alcohol from the reed. And instead of putting me off drink for life, it put me off the saxophone for life.
Okay.
So when I was
I went to London when I was about a year old with my mum during the war, and we came back. So we were always coming and going. But when I was 16 and a half, I finished with the School of Commerce, which is now, of course, the College of Commerce. It's been upgraded to a college. And I went to live with my aunt and uncle in Shepherd's Bush in Askew Road. And I was 16 and a half, and within a fortnight I was working as a junior clerk in the London Electricity Board on Shepherd's Bush Green. And because I was with my aunt and uncle, they were sort of overprotective, and I was allowed to go to football and go to the Odeon in Notting Hill and a few cinemas around Shepherd's Bush and Hammersmith, but I was forbidden from going up to Big Bad Soho, where the clubs were. This is well before mods started now, this is 1960. So I went to see Chelsea playing a midweek game and with some friends of mine, and it was my first time ever been at a match that was floodlit, and at half time some music came on, and it was the Shadows Apache, and that was like a sort of a crystallized moment for me. It was just unbelievable. And prior to that, I mean, when I was living in Cork, when I was about 14, I'd go to a place called the Grenon, which was in the South Mall, on a Sunday afternoon for Irish dancing, and I used to go to the Realt on a Friday night. And my friends then would have been people like Paddy McCarthy, who went on to play with Sunset and stuff like that, and a guy called Finn Barnett. And when it finished at about 10, we would go up to Lennox's in Bandon Road, where they had a jukebox. And that was the beginnings of me, that jukebox, because it was the most beautiful Wurlitzer jukebox you can imagine. And I was listening to stuff like Connie Francis, Ray Charles, Cliff Richard's Living Doll, and all that was beginning to kind of have an influence on me. I never actually became a musician. I should have. I was a frustrated musician, but
but fair enough, you went to London anyway, and you probably went out against your aunt and uncle's wishes or something.
Well, like I said, I wasn't allowed to go to Big Bad Soho, so I called round to my cousin Joey Wagner, who had married a girl called Sheena Lamb, and they lived in Masborough Road in Shepherd's Bush. So I went round to talk about the latest Carry On film, or Tony Hancock, or Eric Sykes and Hattie Jakes and stuff like that, which I used to look at an awful lot on the telly. And during the conversation, I happened to say to my cousin Joey, I'd never been to a dance, like I went to Hops in Fardwell Area Hall back in Cork, but I'd never been to a dance, and what would I do? So he said, well, what you could do is that there's a dance hall just around the corner from here. It's called Bosley's. So what you do is get dressed up next Saturday night, tell Aunt Carol and Uncle John that you're going to the Odeon in Notting Hill, find out what film you're going to, find out about the plot, and go along to Bosley's. So when the appointed Saturday night arrived, I was dressed in, you could take it like in the sense of Paul Weller of the Jam, from the floorboards up, right? So I start from the bottom. I was dressed in winkle picker shoes, red nylon socks, skin tight dog trousers, a pear cardigan with 3 wooden buttons, a white Colombo type shorty Mac, and on my head was perched a green Robin Hood hat with the mandatory feather. And all I was short to complete the wardrobe was a pair of glasses. Didn't matter whether there was lens in them or not. And if I had acquired the glasses, I would have looked like Hank B. Marvin of the Shadows, who then was God, long before somebody came along and daubed a piece of graffiti on a corrugated iron wall to say that Clapton is God. that came many years later.
So go on anyway, tell me about when you met.
So I went along to the dance, right? Bosley's, of course I didn't go to the Odeon in Nottingham. I went along to the dance and walked in. I think I paid three shillings to get in. And I walked in and discovered that everybody was standing over on one side, and I elected to stand on the right-hand side. And I was extremely self-conscious about myself. I had 4 major phobias about myself. They were quadfold. The first one was my height. I was 5'7", a disappointing 5'7". If I wore Cuban heel boots, I could attain 5'9". Yeah. My Cork accent, people thought I was Welsh, right, because of my accent, and my name was Jackie, right, which I hated because I was christened John after my father, and my grandmother at some stage got me on her knee and christened me Jackie. So when I told people in the London Electricity Board where I was working, and indeed out socialising with people, that they asked me, who are you? I said, I'm Jackie. Well, Jackie, it's a girl's name. You're Jack. You've got a girl's name, mate. So that built up with me. Mm-hmm. And then there was the thing about my hair. My hair was like, it's straight now because I'm old and decrepit at 74. But at the time, it was like a spring coil. And it was like Art Garfunkel. And before I went out at night, I just dip it into a basin of water and attain the straight hair look and dry it off with a towel, and it would stay that way for 2 hours. But it just drove me to despair. It was the biggest thing in my life. So I had all these phobias, and there I am standing on the side of the dance floor at Bosley's. This is June 1962. I'm 18 and a half. And I discovered that it's harder to leave now. It takes as much courage to leave as it took to come in. So I'm waiting for the next song to leave, and I'm waiting for the next song to finish to leave. So I just found myself looking across at the band. There was five in the band. They were dressed like the Shadows. What I didn't realise is that they were called the Detours. And all these people that were there, there's 32 people that were there, they would have been there anyway for anyone. So the Detours were unknown, they were a wedding band. So I looked across, and Roger Daltrey was on lead guitar and trumpet, John Entwistle was on bass and trombone. We had a drummer called Dougie Sandham, and Pete Townshend was just like with a big acoustic guitar, learning, so jumbo guitar. So I walked across. It was almost like a mission, like some idiot who doesn't know whether he can walk on water. And I made a huge kind of a mission statement out of this. And I walked across to him, and I mean he had everything that I wanted. He was tall, he had straight hair, he had a guitar. I thought, he's probably even got a girlfriend. And I walked across, and I kind of sort of ambushed him while he was lifting up a steel tubular chair with a 20-watt amp on it. And I said, hello, I said, I'm Jack from Shepherd's Bush. And he looked at me and he said, well, hello, Jack from Shepherd's Bush, I'm Pete from Ealing. And that was it. And within a month, I was calling out to his house in Woodgrange Avenue in Ealing Common with guitar strings and stuff like that, you know.
So tell me, you see people in the press and you often think you kind of know them. You get impressions from them, you see them in interviews and that. But obviously you could be well off. But tell me what their personalities were like.
Well, they didn't really like each other. They just discovered that there were 4 people, diverse people, who were strung together with one common aim, and that was like to make a success of the band. But I mean, the members of the band never socialised together or anything like that. You know, they were from. Pete was very middle class. You know, his dad had been a well-known musician, Cliff Townshend, and his mother, Betty Townshend, she was also a singer with, Leslie Douglas Orchestra and people like that. So John was middle class. He lived in Acton High Street, and Keith was from Wembley. He was pretty working class, and by this stage now, like, we've replaced Dougie Sandham, you know, because he was like 10 years older than the band. So Roger was pretty much working class. Roger lived across the road from me up to the time that he was 14, and then he went to Bedford Park. But they were very, very diverse in many ways. They were very suspicious of each other, and there was a lot of competition in the band.
Yeah, so it wasn't exactly the typical dynamics in a band. There was problems, like, and with the management as well. They'd often have feuds with the management, would they?
Well, I think that if it hadn't been for Chris Stamp and Kit Lambert, the Who would probably have fizzled out, because when Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp came along, they discovered the band playing as the High Numbers. That was in, let's say, July '64, and probably August '64.
And High Numbers was because of the mod,
yeah. By that time, by then, mod had taken root in London. But Kit Lambert was the son of Constant Lambert, who was one of the founding members of Sadler Wells. Kit Lambert's godmother was the ballet dancer Joan Fontaine, and the Lamberts were aristocracy, but they never had any money. And Constant Lambert would be composing on all day Sunday on his piano, where they lived in these like grotty little flats in Notting Hill Gate, and months and months behind with the rent. And then on the Sunday evening, he'd go down to the local pub, and he'd be playing on the piano, Knees Up Mother Brown, to score a few pints for free. It was that kind of life, you know. So like Chris Stamp then came from the other end of society. His dad was a tugboat skipper, and he came from Plaistow, and they were very working class. One great thing about Chris, of course, was that his brother was the famous Terence Stamp, the actor. You know. So, but they were, Kit and Chris, in a sense, they crystallized on, they mirrored or reflected the diversity of the Who itself, because these two guys, they met at the Rank organisation. They were filmmakers and unknown, and they just got together, and the whole idea of coming across the band, the High Numbers at the time, was that they would make a film of them, a documentary. But then somehow it just turned within a week. They were managing the band, so they were dynamic in their approach to promoting the band and stuff like that.
I'm just wondering as well, were you there for that event when Pete Townshend knocked the headstock off the guitar? Were you there at that gig?
At which gig?
When Pete Townshend knocked the headstock off his guitar.
Jesus, we did that every Friday night.
No, I know, but the first one. Were you there at the first stage when that happened?
Oh, yeah,
I know he set the trend.
You mean that famous incident at the Railway Hotel?
Yeah.
Well, I think that incident has become a sort of a myth, almost a bit like Keith Moon supposedly driving a car into a swimming pool on his 21st birthday in Flint, Michigan. So I think what happened is that Pete was just playing, and there was a very low ceiling at the Railway Hotel. I used to go there on a Tuesday night. It was in a place called Harrow and Wellstone, and it was murder to get out there, because it was 17 stops on the tube from Hammersmith, and you couldn't take pills. You couldn't be blocked up on French blues because you'd have work the next day. So it was a bit of a bind to get out there.
Yeah.
So I think it was obviously an apocryphal incident in the biography of the band. I can't
well,
remember. I mean, I can't remember whether I was there that night. I know that in the old days, in the 70s, we could be playing in Newcastle or somewhere like that, and Pete would smash up a guitar, and I'd be standing next to a Marshall lamp or whatever, and a bit of guitar neck would slide across the floor, and I'd like Messi, the footballer, I'd literally trap it with my foot and just bend down, pick it up and put it in my pocket and as a souvenir. But you can't do that today because some bouncer will come up to you, some security fella with about 12 plates of laminated on his chest, and he'll say, don't touch it, don't touch it. That's going to raise 10 or 15,000 pounds for charity. You know, it's
crazy, yeah. But Pete Townshend did set a lot of trends though in the guitar playing styles and that with the Birdman and Windmill and all that. So I know that he gave out to Jimi Hendrix apparently he did, about taking the idea of smashing the guitars. Do you think that's
well? I mean, I'm biased, right? Obviously,
yeah.
You know, you're talking about my older brother.
Yeah.
Although I'm 2 years older than
yeah, yeah.
but the thing about Hendrix is, I think I saw his second gig, and I think that was, I didn't see him at the Bag of Nails. I saw him, by then Chas Chandler had got hold of him, and I think I saw him at the Marquee, and by then he had Noel playing with him and Mitch Mitchell. I'd been to drama school with Mitch Mitchell, so I knew Mitch well. And Mitch sort of copied himself on Keith Moon. But Mitch was a pretty good drummer in his own right. But I remember Kit came along, Kit Lambert and Pete, and the three of us were standing at the side of the stage just watching this animal with a guitar. It was just, you know, it was unreal. The sounds he was getting from it, it was almost as if Townshend, like, feedback was almost part of the chord work, you know. And that was the first night in the Marquee when there wasn't an interval at that particular night. So I mean, that would have been probably his second gig at the Marquee. You know, historians might wish to correct me on that, but I think that is it. But he did kind of, I mean, every artist, no matter what strain of music it is, whether it's writing, music, we all borrow, we steal, we usurp, you know, we, you know, like, Townshend must have stolen from other people that preceded him, and they stole from other people, you know. Like Donovan stealing from Dylan, you know, but this machine kills in the cap, and Dylan was already after stealing from Woody Guthrie. You know, who did Guthrie steal from? Yeah. The same with John Steinbeck, and you know,
so
there's a kind of an evolution of influences right down the line.
Tell me a bit about the parties and
parties.
The wildlife, yeah. I want to know a bit about that side of things.
You promised me you wouldn't ask that question.
I think I read, you said somewhere, in some article, I think I read that we had pills for breakfast and acid for lunch or something like that. Is that,
that was my normal to take.
But, I mean, you must have had great times though, in fairness, like the partying and the...
Well, I mean, I'm one of these sort of 74-year-old cranky old men. And when I hear people say stuff like, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. I mean, that to me is balderdash. Because I remember every single moment of it as a dynamic. There's very, very little that I don't remember, and I have. My wife says that I have not an enhanced memory. I have an elephant's memory, you know. And I put it, my memory is actually improving as I get older. I'm losing my hearing. I still have my hair, but my memory is frightening.
Yeah.
And I put it all down to the LSD, a good quality LSD in '66. So I would strongly recommend good quality LSD for memory. Of course, if my wife Mara sends me into town for 4 messages, I'll go home at 5.
Yeah. But did you meet a lot of what would be future stars in those days when you were hanging out?
Oh, yeah, I did. I remember when we were playing, it was on my 30th birthday in 1973, and we were playing at the Newcastle Odeon. And that's a kind of a bit of a famous night in Who parlance or whatever, because I think I only saw the one night, but the band played 3 nights, and Pete had all these very, very structured, complicated tape, all done by computer these days, but this was all tape spools of Quadrophenia to tie in with the storyline. And Pete insisted on narrating the story as they played. And of course they were playing to probably, let's say at the Newcastle Odeon, I don't know, maybe 4,000 people who didn't want to hear about Jimmy and what was happening to him. They just wanted to hear the bloody music, you know. And Roger would said to him, look, this won't work. It takes too long to narrate the story. You know, if you're going to narrate the story, do it on a tour with a book, but don't start explaining to an audience like. And in a sense, he was right, you know. So then something happened with the tape spools, and the whole thing went wrong. And Townshend got into a rage, and he pulled our sound engineer, Bobby Pridden, out over the desk, and Bobby stormed off and said he'd never work for the Who again, stuff like that.
Mm. Well, tell me a bit about Keith Moon. Could you tell that he was going to, could you foresee what would end up happening to him?
Yeah, Keith was a sad figure. I first saw Keith before he joined the Who when he was with the Beachcombers, and they, as you'd imagine from the name, they played everything by Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys and stuff like that. He was very, very happy with them. He was an only boy. He had 2 sisters, Linda and Leslie, and he was the eldest. And his dad worked in the local council yard. And Keith was, I mean, when he turned up at the Old Fleet Hotel, this was just after the band were going to ask Dougie Sandham to leave. So this would have been about May 1964, and he turned up and he was actually wearing a complete ginger suit and a ginger shirt, and he dyed his hair ginger. And he just came along and he said, look, he said, I can play better than the guy that you've got drumming. And they knew a bit about him because he was in the same circuit, the same stable of bands run by Bob Druce, and they said, look, we'll give him a try. So he went up and they did Roadrunner, and he broke the drummer's bass pedal, and he was hired immediately. But Keith was a very complex man, because Keith had to be told every day of his life that he was the world's greatest drummer. I'd seen Keith get physically sick before gigs, just from, you know, nerves, and he could never be himself. When I met Keith, he was a Cockney from Chaplin Road in Wembley, right? Now, when Kit began to have an influence over the band, Kit Lambert, who spoke like an Oxford Don, Keith listened to him and started copying him. And you'd be somewhere. A typical situation with Keith is the band have gone to bed, after everyone else has gone home, even the groupies have gone home, and you're sitting there with Keith in this little hotel somewhere, and he's waiting for the night manager to return for another round of drinks or whatever, and he's sitting down, and you say, like, you've known him years, and he says, "Dear boy, do you know?" He says, "The lights are going out all over Britain." And you think you're going to get a little bit of Churchill, you know? And he says, "All because people haven't paid their electricity bills." And you know, yeah, you say, like, you could say, "Look, Kate, you don't have to dare buy me. You don't have to carry on like that. Like, Jesus, I've known you since 1963, you know." But I don't think that he knew who he was, because he had so many guises. He lacked confidence terribly.
Yeah, it's devastating for everybody, though, obviously.
Yes,
yeah. Tell me, what was your favourite and then your least favourite album of The Who? What is?
Oh, well, I suppose my favourite album, I suppose I should say Quadrophenia. but in a sense, my favourite album is the only Who album I ever bought, right? All the others were given to me for free. But it was our first album in November 1965. And in those days, singles and albums were released on the Friday. So it was too late to go up to the office for my free album, you know, and I was left, I needed it for the weekend. It was almost like a drug. Yeah. I had to have it for the weekend. I just couldn't wait until Monday, you know, and I went into this little record shop in King Street in Hammersmith, and I bought the album and brought it home. Back to where I was living with my aunt and uncle, and I put it on the record player, and the first song on it was Out in the Street, and of course I would stand in front of the mirror and windmill. I could windmill better than Townshend. And windmill, and of course I cut the back of my hand. I hit the bulb, like every artist would do. And that has resonance for me. And then there's a lovely little side story to it, because the man who actually took the photograph, by coincidence, I became friends with his brother here in Cork years and years later. Cliff, oh Jesus, I knew this happened to me. Sorry, I can't remember his surname. My apologies.
No, that's all right. But tell me, what album did you think?
Cliff Wedgbury. Sorry about that.
Okay.
sorry, Cliff, if you're here. But his brother actually took the photograph of the band standing with the tar barrels. I think it was taken somewhere near Chiswick. And just recently, I met Cliff, and he told me that he has now inherited that very camera. So it's a lovely, you know, the Cork plays we're a small city, you know. We're smaller than we're bigger than Limerick, and we're smaller than Dublin. So we're small but perfectly formed, and our amount of talented musicians in Cork is unbelievable. Yep. It's unbelievable. I mean, what a lot of people don't know about me is that people think Jackie the Bell or Irish Jack, it must have been absolutely fantastic to be driving around with Pete Townshend in his Lincoln Continental, going to the studio and all that kind of stuff. What a lot of these musicians don't know, right, is that when I used to go to the Lacey House in the 80s on a Sunday morning to hear hot guitars, Now it may have been Joe O'Callaghan, or it may have been Bill O'Brien that sang "You Better You Bet," but I used to be uplifted at what they don't know is that I used to go there just to hear that.
Yeah.
But like that used to mean so much to me, you know. Just and it's not a song that you can remember easily or anything like that. So you know, all those little things. Like there's loads of, I've got loads and loads of musician friends in Cork who you know, who I admire, because I can't put a guitar into my hand, and I can't do what they do. I'd love to be able to do it. And I'm not a musician. I'm somebody almost with a borrowed history, but at least anyway I have a performing entity about myself, because I've read, and I've read at Oxford and Cambridge, all over England for mod clubs, and I've read in New York. I've read in Houston, you know, places like that. So in some respects, I'm a little bit more than the groupie with the curly hair. Yeah.
Well, the song "Long Live Rock."
Yeah.
The line "Jack's in the alley selling tickets."
Yeah,
in Hong Kong.
people walk inside with pretending that they're leaving.
Yeah.
We put on our makeup and
But is
work
that,
out all the
is that
lead-ins.
the Marquee Club, the Tuesday night first opening, and they needed to drag people in? Was that based on that? Remember,
no,
they started the first gig on a Tuesday night in the Marquee
I don't
Club.
think so. Long Live Rock is actually the precursor to Quadrophenia.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And when the film came into the capital with David Essex, right, I said to my wife Mara at home, I said, look, there's a fantastic film in the capital, and I'd like you to come along. And she said, what is it? And I said, it's a David Essex film. And she no, I wouldn't be the David Essex. And of course I didn't want to tell her the real reason why I wanted to drag her along. So I annoyed her so much anyway. In the end, she thought it was easier just to
go along,
put on some clothes and go along. So we're sitting down anyway, and she said to me, "So what's going to happen now?" Well, like, well, I said, Billy Fury is going to sing about me. And you know, it was like Billy Fury singing "Long Live Rock."
So what year did you return to Ireland?
I came back in '67. I was on a holiday, and I came back in my mod clothes. I was going to see the Pink Floyd every Friday night, and I knew the band and all that. I just got to know the band, you know. But I was still. I went to the 14-hour Dream in Alexandra Palace, like with a shawl that I got made, like a kaftan that I got made that looked like Rick Wright's, because I used to watch him on the keyboards on his Farfisa, and under that I was mod from head to toe. So I mean, mod sort of died at least by the beginnings of '66, but I was still dressed up as a mod. So I was home on holiday, and when I would come home, the first thing my mother would do was she'd put the Echo in front of me, and she'd be pointing out different jobs, and I would say, "Look, ma'am, I'm this is at 60 Gillabbey Street." I said, I'm quite happy with like working in London and travelling around with the band and stuff like that. So anyway, I went to a dance, and there was a bar called Hickey's in Tuckey Street, and I went in there, like all dolled up, like, you know, mod, and I had this kind of half English accent, like, you know, and they say, where I want to go to a dance, where would I go, you know? And this fella said, well, there's two places, you can go, either go to the Arcadia, or you can go to a place called the Majorca. And I said, well, where's that? He said, it's in Crosshaven. And I said, how do I get down there? Well, he said, if you just walk down to the end of the street, turn right, this building where we are now, And he said, you'll see all the buses lined up. And there was a phalanx of buses waiting to go to Dickie Rock in Miami. And I went down, and I saw this girl, this mad-looking girl, and took her over for a dance. Her name was Mara Kent from Granabraher. And of course the accent and the clothes, and I mean I was wearing clothes that you couldn't even buy in Dublin.
Yeah.
You know, I mean I was well dolled up, and the fact that I was visiting then from London, that all added to the mystique. So we headed off together and had a date the next night, and within a couple of weeks I resigned from my job in High Street, Kensington, and an office job, and I applied for a job on the buses, and I started on the 17th of March 1968 as a bus conductor, and my first run was back to the Majorca.
And that's how you ended up getting christened Jackie the Bell, is it?
Well, the man that christened me Jackie the Bell was a very important man in my life, because he was my mentor. I came back from London thinking that because I'd seen the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, the Who, everybody, that I knew everything. And when I got on the bus duty with Tom Houlihan, and he started telling me about Jim Larkin and the lockout of 1913, and people like Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, and writers like Edna O'Brien and Sean O'Phelan and Brendan Behan and all that, I discovered that I knew nothing. Mm-hmm. And he got me to join the Labour Party, the James Larkin branch, and I'm proud to say that I became a communist. So, for my honeymoon, I wanted to go up the west coast of Ireland with a horse and caravan for my honeymoon. my mother tipped me off, and she said, Mara won't go for that. So I said, well, I said, where does she want to go? And she said she'd love to see Soho.
Well, yeah.
So we went back to. I mean, I'd come back after 8 years, and now here I am on my honeymoon back in London. Yeah. So anyway, we went back in London for a honeymoon, and within 2 days, Pete was calling round to my uncle and aunt's house and picking us up, and we were driving out to his house in Twickenham, and he said to me, Jack, he said, you don't look very mad with the moustache. And I said, that's my Che Guevara moustache. So we'd gone half circle, both of us, because when we started off, right way back in the 60s, when we used to drive to gigs and we used to talk about philosophy and style and, all that, he was a member of Young Communists. And at that time, the best interviews ever that always appeared in Melody Maker was John Lennon, Bob Dylan and Pete Townshend. They were the best interviews of the lot, always. They were so articulate. They were able to articulate rock music, in their own particular style and make it very, very readable. So he used sort of, I used to go to Mass, when even as a mod, I would go to Saturday night Mass in Hammersmith or Fulham, and he used to say to me, I don't know why you go to that. I mean, why don't you join Young Communists like me? So I had by 1970, March 1970, I had become a communist, or regarded myself as a communist, and he had found this Indian perfect master, spiritual guru called Meher Baba, right? So he'd gone half circle. So he'd become religious.
So when you came home, Did you start working in Henry's, or were you just hanging around Henry's? Or?
I worked in Sir Henry's for about 3 years, from about 83 to 84 and 85, and I took over from Mick Lynch, Mick the Punk, God love him, who is no longer with us.
Yeah.
And Mick started out collecting glasses, and so I took over from Mick, and like my immediate boss then was Jimmy O'Hara. So I'm still in the post office, you know, and I'd come home from work, and then I'd get down to the Grand Parade Hotel at about 3 o'clock, and I'd be going around putting up posters for gigs, and if we booked a band that there was only 50 or 60 turned up, it was Jackie the Bell organised it. If Jerry Lucy wanted to know who booked them, Jackie the Bell booked them. Of course, if it was the other way around, if the crowd was, you know, couldn't get in the door,
jammed, yeah.
it was a Jimmy O'Hara production.
And is that where you met the Frank and Walters? Was it in Henry's?
No,
or was it?
I have a long history with Ashley Keating, because while we were growing up in Fulham, we'd moved from Hammersmith to Fulham. My mum ran a bakery shop in Fulham, in North End Road, and the Keatings lived in Gowan Avenue. So then when we came back to Cork, Tony Keating, Ashley's dad, would call to my mum's house, or my mum's house in Gillabbey Street, and he'd bring Ashley along. Ashley was only about that high with a head of curly hair.
Yeah.
But then, of course, I became the Frank and Walters postman. So like the three members of the band, they lived in Glencairn.
And how did it come about that who did they ask you to do the book?
I was at my daughter's communion, and we were in a bar in Dublin Hill, and I got the phone call. I was kind of half expecting, and it was Paul Linehan, and he said, would you write the book on us? So I was delighted, you know. It was
brilliant.
I loved writing it, because there was different things that I discovered about the Frank and Walters, and this kind of they have this kind of down-home philosophy about themselves. They're minimalists, and it was easy to write about them because I liked them, and I always liked the three of them as people, and despite the fact that the Linehans never had a letterbox or anything like that, but it was easy to the book was easy to write, so I was absolutely delighted with it.
And the Who concert files, then you co-wrote with Joe McMichael, is it?
That took 7 years to write.
Yeah.
That was a long haul. I came back, I think we did 5 nights at Shea Stadium no, not Shea Stadium, the Joint Stadium in New York. And it was my first time ever in New York. And I came back, I was on a bit of a high, because I went back to work. And I got a letter from Los Angeles, from this guy who I'd never heard of, called Joe McMichael, saying that it would be a good idea if he put his short few years and my longevity of the Who together and write a book on all their a chronologic book of their dates and stuff like that. And I mean, it was, you know, I don't think there was like computers, or there may have been computers around, but the writing of it, you could write a book itself about the actual writing of it, because I think I went to the British Library. I think I paid 5 visits there of tours. Like each tour would be a week. I would take a week off from the post office, take up my summer leave, go over, stay in some grotty place in Earl's Court, and go on the tube up to Colindale, where the British Library is, and I would spend all day in there and looking for, you know, obscure Who dates and stuff like that. So I think I would have done that 5 times, and each time would have been a week of going up there. and we got nowhere with the book. Nobody was interested until Pete Townshend decided that he'd write the foreword. And once he agreed to write the foreword, all the people who had turned us down immediately came running. So it was, you know, it was a lovely tribute. What was nice about it was that we had a launch in what is now Larry Tompkins. It was Sally O'Brien's, and we had the launch there. But that was for my mother, because it was special to me that I wrote a book. Because my mother always told me that I could write. And like I said earlier in the interview, like one of our proudest moments was coming into this fantastic building that we have here, and seeing Jack Lyons up on the shelf. You know, that meant a great deal to me. And we had a launch in London, and then we had a massive launch in New York, and I think we got 11.5 seconds on MTV, and when which is absolutely colossal.
Huge, yeah. Exactly.
And then there was, I mean, I done loads of radio out there and stuff like that, and you know, but I mean, the book sold extremely well.
That's great. When the Who played in the Marquee here in Cork, I think Pete Townshend mentioned you a couple
Not
of
an
times
embarrassing
today.
moment in my life.
I like that you get a lot of mentions though, and obviously it kind of shows the fondness there. Like, but I think it was one of the songs, "Real Good Looking Boy," is it? And then he said, "That's obviously not Jack Lyons we're talking
That's right.
about."
That was Roger. Yeah.
Roger said it. And then did he also say about "Mind Your Postman"? Was it?
Yeah.
Did he finish up at the end and say to the crowd, "Mind
I
your
think
postman"?
he did. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a buddy of mine was telling me that. But anyway, I'm going to ask a few people to ask you a question, if that's all right. So, Jack, we have a question from the audience. Tom Clark.
Hi, Tom.
Talk to
I probably have a million questions, but I was always fascinated, being from the States. I'd always heard that American records, like R&B records and blues records and early rock and roll, were quite precious to get here and hard to get. And I was wondering, when the bands first started coming to America in the 60s, a lot of these bands were covering the same American songs. And I was wondering how, since you didn't have cassette players or people were passing around cassettes in the day, how did these records get spread around, and how do these songs get spread around for all these groups to rush out to learn these songs?
You mean records coming from the States into England?
How did you get them, and how did you spread them around?
I think that the origins of that would have been the American servicemen who came to Britain and served in the different the stations. For some it was like army barracks around Britain, and they brought, a lot of these people, they brought records that were unavailable in England. You know, like a lot of records on the Sue label and stuff like that, which couldn't be bought in England. And these were the influences. This is how blues like sort of found its root with people like Alexis Corner and John Mayall and people like that in England itself, and of course Cyril Smith, and that was the origins of it. And a lot of the early 60s bands then, they played at the different little stations where American troops were, because American troops were based all over the place, particularly in Germany.
It's fascinating.
Okay, and Monica McNamara has a question for you, Jack.
Hi,
Jack. You were talking earlier about your 2 books, and I loved the Frank and Walters one. I just thought your voice really came out, and it was really unique style and things like that, you know. Do you have any other plans to write a book?
No.
No?
I don't, because I'm getting a bit lazy as I get older. So at the moment, no, I don't. I do a lot of short stories, but the idea of doing a book is I don't know. It's for now anyway. It's a bit, you know. I find it much easier to do short stories, like starting on the back of an envelope and just starting with practically nothing. You know, I do a reading every year at the CSN, you know, Coláiste Stefan Neva, which I fondly refer to as Crosby, Stills and Nash. And I do it every October, November. And my last one, which I did, was there was a young boy in the audience, and he said, you know, he said, I suffer a lot from writer's block. Oh yes, I said, yeah. So he said, but I put a page of A4 in front of me and I don't know what to write. Well, I said, don't ever put a page of A4 in front of you. I said, put the back of a little bill, or keep it as small as possible, and, you know, just write about the fact that you can't write, and or write about the last person you saluted in town. Just, you know, and before you know where you are, you're going to be moving on to that page of A4, you know.
It's good advice, yeah. Thank you.
Padraig has a question for you.
Jack, it's Quadrophenia. I suppose I'm most interested here is that, I mean, people have had single songs written about them and so forth, but to have a concept album, which is in many ways, I suppose, trying to understand your personality and fit it into the personalities of the band and so, like, how did you in Cork kind of receive that?
Padraig, before you get carried away about Quadrophenia, right, first of all, there's no Quadrophenia pension.
it's very important to state.
It's nice to know that there's a single, The Happy Jack, or whatever, and an album, Quadrophenia, about you. But it's sort of, it's very difficult to explain to people, because the way that muse works is that it doesn't happen this way. Somebody says, oh, you know, it's a lovely day. It's supposed to be beautiful tomorrow. Oh, by the way, I'm writing a song about you. So all the times that I used to be sitting down with Pete Townshend on different situations, telling him all these little kind of like jeremiads about my complexes and my background and stuff like that, and my Irishness and how much I wanted to get away from it. What I didn't realise is all this was delivered in a certain lyrical fashion, of course. What I didn't realise is that Townshend was making a sort of like a mental moratorium of it. And sometimes I'd catch him and he'd be kind of looking at me like, and I said, maybe he thinks I'm a little bit mad or whatever. You know, so, but the thing is that everything that I hated about myself, he found it lyrically humorous. And I used to go to great lengths to tell him about my complexes, my quadfold complexes, which I explained to Sheena earlier. And the thing about it is that, like, if you challenge the seed of originality or the concept of originality, sometimes it won't stand up. You know, like, for instance, Barbara O'Reilly, that track that's a nod to Terry Riley, the music experimentalist. But Pete I don't think I've ever seen an interview, I heard an interview of him where he goes at length into it. So it's difficult. It's like a kind of a swap of autobiography. You know, if you write about somebody, they've already got their own identity, and you come along then and you add yours onto it, and then that person has to explain and stuff like that. I can see loads of things there where Pete was sort of influenced. You know, like on a Sunday afternoon, we were only married about a year or two, living over the North Mall, and on a Sunday afternoon I would write pages and pages, 14, 15, 16 pages of subconsciousness, to Pete Townshend, and we would write every 2 or 3 weeks, and it would be, a lot of it would be about what we did when we were mods in the Gold Hawk Club at Shepherd's Bush and stuff like that. And all of that was like forming something for him.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier on, Jack, about going to Newcastle for the Quadrophenia gig. I think you went sick on the day and you
I did.
And
yes.
You were backstage and you were handed a bottle of Jack Daniels. But few hours later you provided a very good cover story for Keith Moon. And you went back to London. I thought that was, you might tell us about that.
Jesus. I never told him that I went sick for a week, right? So I limped into my doctor in Camden Key, and I told him about this rare South American flea bite that I'd gotten on my ankle. So he professed me unable to walk for a week. So I limped out of the Victorian study room on the other leg, the wrong leg. So anyway, I got a train and a boat and arrived in Newcastle on the afternoon of my 30th birthday. And I never told him that I was coming or anything like that. So I just sort of said at the reception, look, will you tell Pete Townshend that Irish Jack is here? So he bounded down the stairs, and he was amazed to see me. So I told him it was my birthday and stuff like that, and he said, how old are you? I said, I'm 30. So he was only 28. So we went for dinner, and at some stage I was drinking a lot of expensive French wine, and I was getting a little bit saucy with him. And this is why we were sitting down. And at one stage, I'm standing up, and I playfully caught him. I chinned him first. I always did that when I met up with him. Gave him a kind of, you know, like a friendly chin, you know, a fist in the chin. And I caught him by the lapels, and I said, Jesus, I said, Happy Jack, why didn't you say that he lived in the sand in the Republic of Ireland? Because that would have fitted in, you know. So he said, I would have, but I couldn't make it bloody rhyme. And of course, in those days, when you wrote songs, they were almost like keys that fitted into locks. Moon had to rhyme with June. Nowadays, it's an E chord or something like that. So, you know, so anyway, we went to the gig, and the amazing thing about it, this is the height of Quadrophenia, and he's dressed up as a skinhead, right? And he's wearing the short black Crombie with a little badge on top and the Dr. Martin boots and stuff like that. So Quadrophenia, what people don't realise is that when Quadrophenia was written, it was written right in the midst of Deep Purple, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and stuff like that. There was no mods around in 72 or 73 when the album came out. So, apart from being a magnificent piece of music, I mean, you know. So anyway, we went to the Odeon, and that was when I think I met Bill Corbishley, our new manager, for the first time. And he said, I heard it's your birthday, and he handed me a bottle of Southern Comfort. So there was an empty pint glass next to the Newcastle Brown that I was already drinking, and I poured the Southern Comfort into the pint glass and started off. And I think I went into a fog of oblivion by the time we got to Bellboy. And I woke up in the Five Bridges Hotel. And the band had gone. And I was now saying, Jesus, what a long journey back down to London from Newcastle by train. And I said to the reception, I said, are you sure they're all gone? And she said, I'll just check. And she picked up the phone. I'll never forget that smile on her face when she said, Mr. Moon is still here. So we drove back that night then to his house in Chertsey, Tara House, and he kept me up all night. My head was swimming with a hangover, and he kept me up all night doing these Winston Churchill speeches and stuff like that.
Roger's new book, I just wondered, did you give him a helping hand?
Oh, yeah.
No, I didn't, but I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Right, as we all are.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's out in October.
Right.
So, hello, Dave.
In respect to the Clash, what way did it go down with the Shea Stadium, with the band?
Well, the Clash, they liked the Clash.
Yeah.
In fact, Pete was a huge fan of the Clash. But I think that the Clash, although the Clash did do substitute in their set, the Clash sort of looked on the Who as a little bit kind of Rolling Stonesy.
Right.
But it has to be said that at that time, people like Queen and the Stones, they were being vilified for being so monstrous bands that could fill Wembley Stadium. The only band, and I have to say this, and I know I'm biased, but it's true, the only band that were accepted as being okay by the punk generation was the Who. Because the Sex Pistols used to I Can't Explain, they used to My Generation. So, you know, it's nice to know that. It's nice that there was, it wasn't an empty vessel, you know, that like Townshend like had a social conscience, and you know, I mean, in his interviews he has a remarkable love of music, and he has a fantastic way of delivering himself and being eloquent, and he can make rock and roll mean something. He can use Kit Lambert used to be the same. I would be dribbling on, explaining something to Kit Lambert, and Lambert would come up with one word, and that would be it. That would be the ounce of what I was trying to say. You know.
Excellent. Okay.
Hello.
I was at...
I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
George Wallace, my name. I was at the Albert Hall for the Chuck Berry and the Who concert that
yes.
in a riot, and I was wondering whether, I don't know whether you were there or you were backstage.
I wasn't there.
Yeah, whether there was any contact between Chuck Berry and the Who around that.
I don't think there would have been much contact, because Chuck Berry was not a nice man. He could be very arrogant, and Pete got I think, was that Leicester? Oh no, somebody threw a bottle at Townshend, and he had to have 5 or 6 stitches in the back of his head. That didn't happen at Chuck Berry, but the band, I think the band were attacked by a bunch of Hell's Angels.
It was Teddy Boys and...
Yeah.
And Roger Daltrey was threatening them with the microphone.
That's right,
and
yeah.
They rioted.
Yeah.
Knocked over all the seats and threw them around.
Yeah, I mean, it was a strange combination anyway, to put Chuck Berry with the Who.
I think it was the same day as the Rolling Stones in Hyde Park, actually. It was the same day.
The open air concert?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I have the honour of talking to one man who was actually at that, and he told me he was in the 5th row. Our president, Michael D. Higgins, and he was actually, I'm very proud to know, I met him here in this library some months ago, and I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to shake hands with him, and I said, Mr. President, I said, you probably won't remember me, but my name is Jack Lyons. I said, we were on Anything Goes together in 1984 when a Who book was being reviewed, and he was looking at me, and he said, yes, he said, I remember. I said, we had dinner afterwards, and I said, you were telling me all about being in the 4th or 5th row of people at the Stones Hyde Park when Mick Jagger read a eulogy to Brian Jones, and I was like honoured to get a handshake because I have a tremendous amount of respect for the man. But to get a presidential hug was, I think I sailed out of the library on a 4-foot high jet stream. I was so honoured and pleasured to meet him.
I was at that gig, Jack.
Sorry? Hello, Pat.
I was at that gig, Hyde Park. Remember well.
Yeah.
Anyway, I suppose we'll have to leave it at that. I'd say
All right,
thanks
thank
a
you,
million.
Sheena.
Thanks very much for all your stories. Thanks to all of you as well.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks for
Much
coming.
appreciated.
Cheers.